All right, let's get straight into it. Today, we're tackling a huge topic for your AQA psychopathology exam, the behavioral, emotional, and cognitive characteristics of depression. Nailing this stuff is absolutely key to unlocking those top marks, so let's dive right in.
It seems like a simple question, doesn't it? But really think about it. This is right at the heart of what psychology is all about. How do we take an experience that is so personal, so complex, like depression, and somehow turn it into a clear, diagnosable checklist? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the core knowledge, the facts you just need to know for those AO1 marks. Then we'll shift gears into AO2, where we apply that knowledge to real-life situations and link it up to some key theories. And finally, we'll hit those crucial AO3 evaluation points before we wrap it all up with a super clear exam strategy. Okay, Section 1. This is all about your AO1 marks. Think of this as the foundation, the essential building blocks of your answer. You've got to know these inside out before you can even think about building the rest of your essay.
First up, the behavioral characteristics. These are the things you can actually see, the signs you can observe. And what's really fascinating here is that you often see complete extremes. So someone with depression might have what we call psychomotor retardation, which is just a fancy way of saying they feel incredibly slow, heavy, and lethargic. Or they could have the complete opposite, psychomotor agitation, where they're restless and just can't keep still. You'll often see this alongside huge changes in sleep and eating patterns, and sometimes increased aggression, which can be directed at others or tragically turned inwards on themselves.
Next, we have the emotional side of things. Now, lowered mood is the classic symptom we all think of, but it's so much more than just feeling sad. It's often this persistent, gnawing feeling of emptiness or even just numbness. And here's a key point to remember for your exam: anger. Depression isn't always quiet. It can be incredibly angry, either aimed at other people or at the self. And of course, this all ties in with lowered self-esteem, where a person can feel completely and utterly worthless.
And finally, let's look at the cognitive characteristics, the changes in how a person thinks. This is so important. People with depression often find it really hard to concentrate or make decisions. They can fall into what's called absolutist thinking, that black and white view where one tiny mistake feels like a total catastrophe. And they often develop this kind of negative filter, or selective attention, where their brain just zooms in on all the bad stuff and completely ignores anything positive. Now, keep these cognitive points locked in your mind because they are going to link directly to the theories we'll talk about in a moment.
Okay, so now that we have the what, let's move on to the how. This is where we make the jump to AO2. So it's not enough to just list off the characteristics. You have to show the examiner you can actually use them and apply them to real-world scenarios.
This slide right here is a perfect illustration of AO2 in action. Just look at how the exact same core characteristics show up differently depending on the context. For a teenager, you might see them withdrawing from friends or their attendance at school dropping off. In the workplace, it might look more like being late all the time or having low productivity. The underlying symptoms, like low activity levels and that black and white thinking, are the same, but how they look on the outside changes. This is precisely the kind of applied example you want to be using in your essays to get those AO2 marks.
Right, let's take it up a level. This is a higher level AO2 skill, connecting these characteristics back to the psychological theories on your AQA spec. This is what shows the examiner you see the bigger picture and how all these different parts of the course actually fit together.
Let's start with Aaron Beck's famous negative triad. Remember those cognitive characteristics we were just talking about? Well, Beck argued that they're not just symptoms. They actually keep depression going through a cycle of negative thoughts. The first corner of his triad is the self. This is where that emotional characteristic of low self-esteem gets twisted into a thought. Something like, I am worthless or I am a total failure.
The second part of the triad is the world. This is where that selective attention we mentioned really kicks in. The person starts to see everything around them through this super pessimistic filter, leading to thoughts like, everything is against me, or the world is just an awful place.
And the triad is completed with the future. Here, that absolutist, black and white thinking creates this overwhelming sense of hopelessness, with thoughts like, it's never going to get any better, or I am never going to succeed. You can really see how these three things, the self, the world, and the future, create this powerful, vicious cycle that can trap a person in depression.
Albert Ellis gives us another cognitive explanation with his ABC model. So, you have an activating event, like getting some criticism at work. That event is then filtered through an irrational belief, something like, I must be perfect at everything I do. And here's the crucial bit of the model.
Ellis says it's not the event itself that's the problem. It's the irrational belief about the event that leads to the emotional consequence. In this case, feelings of depression. It's a really clear link between a cognitive characteristic, like absolutist thinking, and the emotional outcome.
Okay, we've described the characteristics for AO1 and we've applied them for AO2. You know what's coming next. It's time for AO3, evaluation. This is where you get to be the critic, to analyze this descriptive model and access those highest marks.
So let's put on our critical thinking hats for a second. We have to ask the question, how good is this three-part model really? Does just listing symptoms actually give us the full picture of what depression is? Asking these kinds of tough questions is the absolute key to brilliant AO3 evaluation.
Let's break this down. A huge strength is its practical application. The behavioral symptoms, for instance, give therapists really clear targets for treatments, so it's super useful in the real world. Plus, the cognitive side is really well supported by those solid theories from Beck and Ellis. But there are some pretty big limitations. The model just describes symptoms. It doesn't really explain what causes them in the first place. This brings up issues of validity. Is it truly measuring just depression, especially when a symptom like poor concentration is also a massive part of anxiety? And what about generalizability? The model can be quite culturally biased because some cultures tend to express distress physically, not emotionally.
All right, let's pull all of this together into a practical, no-nonsense toolkit that you can use for your revision and, most importantly, take with you into the exam hall.
Here is your game plan. It's this simple. First, you describe the behavioral, emotional, and cognitive characteristics. That's your AO1 marks in the back. Second, you apply them to a scenario to get your AO2. To get the top AO2 marks, you link them to the theories of Beck and Ellis. Finally, for AO3, you evaluate the model using its strengths and weaknesses, making sure you use those key evaluation concepts like validity and generalization, just like we did.
And that brings us to one last big question to chew on. We've spent this whole explainer breaking depression down into this neat, tidy checklist of symptoms for your exam. But if the experience itself is so deeply personal and unique to each individual, can a standardized list ever really, truly capture its reality? It's a question that goes way beyond the textbook, and it's definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.